This video shows you how to prime and empty METIman Nursing's gastric reservoir. Here's what you'll need. Distilled water. The 60 milliliter syringe with a Luer lock extension set from METIman's inventory kit. A 14 French nasogastric tube. Suction tubing and canister. Some towels. 2 buckets, one for wastewater and one for clear distilled water. Silicone lubricant from METIman's inventory kit. And food coloring for making gastric colored fluid. For the purposes of this demonstration, we'll be using clear distilled water. It's recommended that the gastric reservoir be drained completely before each use to avoid overfill. The reservoir is primed through the gastric fill port in METIman Nursing's left shoulder. Remove the cap from the gastric fill port. Connect the Luer lock extension set to the port. Attach an empty 60 milliliter syringe to the Luer lock extension set. Slowly withdraw 60 milliliters of fluid or air from the gastric reservoir through the port 3 times. After each aspiration, disconnect the syringe from the Luer lock extension set and empty it. When you've finished aspirating the gastric system, fill the syringe with 60 milliliters of clear distilled water or with distilled water mixed with food coloring to simulate gastric fluids. Connect the syringe to the Luer lock extension set. Inject all 60 milliliters of water into the gastric reservoir. Disconnect the syringe and Luer lock extension set from the port. Make sure to put the cap back on the gastric fill port when you're done. Fluids may be suctioned from the nasogastric tube by connecting the end of the tube to standard suction equipment or devices. For continuous drainage, an IV bag and tubing can be connected to the port on METIman's left shoulder. You can adjust the amount of flow by using the roller clamp. To perform gastrointestinal gavage or lavage, learners may instill up to 60 milliliters of fluid into the nasogastric tube. After the simulation is over, be sure to empty the gastric reservoir. First, remove the cap from the gastric fill port. Connect the Luer lock extension set and an empty 60 milliliter syringe to the gastric fill port. Aspirate fluid until the reservoir is empty. Disconnect the syringe from the Luer lock extension set and empty it. If colored distilled water was used, you'll need to flush the gastric reservoir with clear distilled water, so fill the syringe with 60 milliliters of clear distilled water. Connect the full syringe to the Luer lock extension set. Now inject all 60 milliliters of distilled water into the gastric fill port. Use the syringe to aspirate fluid from the port until the reservoir is empty. Disconnect the syringe and Luer lock extension set. And put the cap back on the port. This video showed you how to prime and empty METIman Nursing's gastric reservoir. If you need more information, please consult the METIman user guide or call CAE Healthcare Customer Service at 1-866-462-7920 or one of our international numbers if appropriate. If you found this video helpful and would like to see more, visit our website at www.caehealthcare.com.